Well, Zach, welcome to the Sharpen podcast. I've so enjoyed just chatting with you before we get started here. I'm leery that we'll keep talking and we're going to miss so much. So we'll get right into it. Welcome to Sharpen.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, this is great fun. I've enjoyed getting to know a little bit about you virtually. There's nothing though like connecting and in this kind of face-to-face space as well. So tell us a little bit about who you are as a person.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Rhode Island, so Italian family. The youngest of three brothers. And when you're the youngest, a couple of things happen. You get really, really good at entertaining yourself, and you get really good at comparing yourself to others, especially when you have two older brothers. And that feature of like trying to search for my own significance, starting in my childhood, really carried through to college and then my first job. And what happened is I was searching for something, some job title, some salary number, something to give me worth, to help me compete and compare. And I realized very quickly that one, I think Oswald Chambers says comparison is the thief of joy. I realized that quickly. But I also realized that the problem with being motivated by acquiring and achieving things is that you can achieve them. And then what? Well, you have to make another goal. And then what? Well, it's just a constant chasing after wind, right? Chasing after something else. And I was in this first job and I was making a lot of money. I was in advertising sales in Washington, D.C., but everybody, including myself, was miserable. So around me, and all of my family and friends, they thought that I had made it. They were like, so I had this very weird tension. And what happened was I met this cab driver and it was a profound experience for me that shapes why I'm here right now. But I was on a lunch break and there was a cab driver. He pulled up next to me, and on the East Coast, you really don't make small talk on the weekdays. So it was kind of weird that he got out and he said, "Hey, how's it going?" And I just mumbled, is it the weekend yet? Cause that's what I had heard people talk about. And it was Tuesday at the time, which is embarrassing to think about. And then I asked him, I expected him to hate his job. He's a cab driver. I thought that he would not be happy. And he lit up like some of those people do, those people you meet in your everyday. He lit up and he said, "Oh, what do you mean? It's great. I get to drive people from around the world, all around the nation's capital every 30 minutes. I'm people's parents they don't have. I am people's friends they don't talk to." And I was like, I want that. I want that perspective. Like, he didn't talk about what he did. He talked about the contribution of why he did it. And it was ever since that moment with this anonymous cab driver that probably doesn't even know that I'm talking to you right now because of him, that I left that first job out of college. And I started studying how we can lead and live with that perspective first, of thinking about the contribution we're making no matter where we are. And the results are good, like we can acquire and achieve things as a result, but that contribution, that's what transcends. And so now, as a researcher at Colorado State University in the Center for Meaning and Purpose, I study how to develop a purposeful mindset in work, how to think about your own contribution on a daily basis. I study people in all occupations, that how they experience meaningfulness in their work. And then I do a lot of consulting work on the organization side with organizations on creating environments that enable the experience of meaning and purpose in work. So a little bit of a long story, but that moment, just one purposeful person completely changed my life because of how he talked about the work he did, not what he did, and his mindset.
Well, it's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. And what I so wish that the cab driver could be someone that you could share this episode and your story and everything with. That would be so profound. So there's I love that. I love that you made that shout out right there of how he impacted your life. So you mentioned the work that you're doing, so important. So significant. So we have an audience of young professionals that are in those first 10 years of the career. And it sounds like as you reflect back on that first job and those experiences, it's so easy for you that probably just really this audience, you're like, yes, I get you, like I'm in the midst of this. So tell us, so you think about the young professional segment, right? And you've got those that are like, man, I feel such purpose in my job and love it. And others might be on the other side of that. So there has to be a mindset or a reflection process or something in the work that you've done. Share that with us. What are you learning about finding purpose in your work? What does it look like? And I'm throwing 14 questions to you at once. I had on a guest yesterday that's like, I'm an introvert. Can you ask me one question at a time so I can process? So I'll be quiet now.
Yeah, great questions. I mean, if I knew what I knew now, I could have probably made profound positive meaning in that
Mhm.
work that I was in, that job
Mhm.
that I didn't like. And that's why I was so excited to hear the focus of your podcast, because jobs don't give us meaning. The big
Mhm.
mistake we've made is that we think a job will give us meaning. We make meaning in jobs. So, I often, I find people that say, oh, well, it must be easy to experience meaningful work if you're a doctor or if you're a highly successful banker or if you're in
Sure.
these professions. But in my research, I have researched janitors, mechanics, bus drivers, and all the way up to the C-suite level, CEOs. And the one common thing is that the job doesn't give people meaning. They have a mindset of being able to make meaningfulness in their job. So I've worked with trauma surgeons who have a meaningful job but don't experience meaning in their job.
Hmm.
I've worked with janitors who on the surface may have a job that seems menial or mundane, but are able to experience profound meaningfulness in the work. And this is a very liberating concept, right? That
Absolutely.
we can be active constructors of our work, not passive recipients of the situation we're in. And when we are able and equipped with the tools to make meaning and discover purpose where we are, then we'll be able to do it, wherever we want to go. And so it's a mindset that can be learned. And if you're listening right now and you're in a job that is difficult for you right now, and it's just kind of draining, and you're maybe trying to fake yourself into liking it, stepping back and just thinking about, okay, from a task basis, how is what I'm going to do today going to impact another human being? Just starting there. And what you'll find, or go through the flip side, if you're having trouble with that question, ask yourself, if I don't do this, how will it
Mm-hmm.
impact another human being? What you'll find is that almost every task in your day, no matter what job you're doing, there's a human being that's inevitably at the end of that task, whether it's a coworker, whether it's someone in another department that needs you, or hopefully you can see the impact on the end user of whatever it is that you're doing. And so often we lose the connection with our ability to make an impact on an everyday basis. So when I talk about being
Mm-hmm.
purposeful in work, what I'm talking about is thinking about work, being in work, and doing the work from a contribution centered mindset, thinking about what impact you can make where you are. And then you open up a lot about yourself, where you do make an impact, the themes about where you are going to make legacy and leave a legacy and a contribution. And you'll see those almost always come up again and again and again throughout your career.
Mm. That's so good. I think that it's so important, Zach, as we think about what the workplace looks like now. So I mentioned to you before we got started, I work with farmers. Their why of what they do is pretty darn significant, right? They feed
Mm.
and clothe the world. And every day they get to see most every day they get to see that, they get to work with it with their hands, see it with their eyes, smell it with their nose, even, those mint farmers up in Indiana and Michigan. But it's a little bit easier to remember the why. For today's young professionals, for sometimes when the work is very digital, it can be a little bit
Mm.
discouraging sometimes to really see the fruit of the effort. So I love what you're talking about, is going through the practice of, if I do this, what impact does it have? If I don't, what are some of those healthy applications that you see young professionals period, take on to keep their mind focused on purpose? I love those questions you drew out. Is there anything else you've observed in your work where, if you've seen folks like, man, this person's super purposeful, has a whole heck of a lot of meaning in their work, here's some things I've observed that they do on a daily or weekly basis to keep that in line?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the first interviews I ever did for a research project was with a janitor named Mary, and she was a janitor at the university that I work in, and she
Mm.
cleaned residence halls. So she cleaned the toilets, the hallways, vacuumed the hallways. You know, a tough job. She had a tough life
Mhm.
outside of work. She worked really, really hard, and she was able to move up in the field and retire. And I went in to interview her, and she told me very early on in the interview that she had come back out of retirement to be a janitor level 1 again 30 years later, you know, to go back out of retirement and do this work again. And I just asked her, you know, I just stopped, and being a bad researcher at the time, I just said, why the heck would you come out of retirement? And she cleaned bathrooms in the residence halls. And she told me, she said, Zach, I couldn't sit at home and stand the thought of those kids in that dormitory not having a mom figure away from home.
Mm.
Right. So
Yeah.
she very early on, she told me that she was able to see that if a janitor position existed at the university and the university's mission and purpose was to educate people, then by default, her job existed to educate people. Now you may think it's menial, like she's cleaning every day. But what she was able to do is, for example, every time before she went into a bathroom, she said that she told herself, I'm cleaning this bathroom so that the kids don't get sick. She would repeat that narrative in her mind. She would
Yeah.
do things in her tasks to move her as close as possible to the end recipient of the work. So all the other janitors, you know, everybody, the what is they had to vacuum the hallways. An example is for Mary, she would go up and down the hallways at the beginning of the semester, knock on the doors and say, hey, I'm Mary, I'm your janitor. You know, what's your class schedule? And she would time when she vacuumed the hallways for when the most students were leaving the hall so she could talk to them. And what
Hmm.
we find in like thousands of interviews
That's
with people
awesome.
across the world is that there's a few things that they do to experience everyday meaningfulness. I call it everyday purpose.
Mm.
And the first is, well, we know that meaningfulness is predicted by 3 things. So one, do you know the significance of what you're doing? So a question to ask for that is, well, how about you do this in your head right now, listener? Think about the task you hate the most in your job. This is fun. Now, I want you to just ask yourself this question: significance. What would happen to a human being if you didn't do it, and who? Think about the face. Think about the name. Who is it? Is it someone in accounting? Is it the person at the end of the supply chain? Who is that person? And the second is a sense of identity of the task. So how does what you're doing fit into a bigger whole? So going to your manager, if you don't know how a task fits into the bigger whole, and asking them, hey, can I see the end outcome? Can I see the end
Mm.
product? Can I see the full whole of this? Because when we can attach something to the bigger outcome, it's powerful. When when NASA was trying to go to the moon, they had in every department, you know, a study just uncovered, they had what was called a ladder to the moon, where every week they would attach a task to
Wow.
tangible objectives that laddered up to putting a person on the moon, because most of the 300,000 people that worked for NASA at the time would never see the moon landing. So being able to know that identity of the task is powerful. And then the third question, and this is a really good one, is how can I use my strengths more to do it? So it's called skill variety in the research, but really, how can I use my strengths more to do this? And the research finds that, for example, if you activate curiosity just by asking that question, we end up feeling better about the work.
Mm. That is that's such a great reflection exercise, and I think to have that on a monthly, yearly, ongoing basis, especially as young professionals, as our roles and companies might change, right? So don't forget to make that a practice. And I can even imagine, Zach, that's really important if you're considering a new opportunity.
Mm,
That would be the group of questions to then ask, because it may come with a greater salary. It may become with
absolutely.
whatever it is. However, if we are going to lose, and I think the challenge that you would say is that there's meaning and purpose in every job and you need to find it. However, if you keep going back to this current role, this current company's like, man, that's where I come alive, that might really help set direction if you're in the midst of struggling with those career decisions. Because that's the feedback we always get from listeners, is that I'm debating this job or this job or this company or this company. So
Yeah, and
yeah.
I think so. That's a great point. Definitely not saying that if there's a better job out there that makes you come alive, go do that now. But
Mm-hmm.
what are you doing now?
Yeah.
You know, while you're thinking about that job or applying for the job, you're spending 40% of your waking life somewhere. And in that somewhere is usually evidence of your meaning that you can use in job interviews. For example, if someone asks you, you know, tell me about it, all those behavioral questions, right? Like, tell me about your last job. Well, if you start by showing them why the work you did mattered, and having those stories of the significance of the human problems you existed to solve, versus the line by line resume statistics that you have, which anybody can copy what you do and how you do it. They can't copy at your core why you are, the impact that you make really authentically. It can be your ultimate competitive advantage in work is to think this way.
Yeah, that's a person I want to hire all day long because they're inspiring, right? And they're full of life and energy, right? And then that's going to trickle down to your clients, customers, people that you represent.
In interviews, right, to people who are looking for a new job, they say, oh, well, you know, they talk about what maybe didn't work out at their past job or why they're looking to move forward in the future. But, you know, I coach employers right now on writing job descriptions with those three things in mind. You know, not focusing on what the job does, because anybody can do that. Focusing on the human problems the job solves and attaching people's strengths to that, because that's what makes purpose come alive. So I think it's both, and the individual has to do this, but then in my other work with organizations, the organization has to enable this type of work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I love how you mentioned that, because we're talking about in the day-to-day, in the things that we love to do, and sometimes the things that are really hard to do, which, by the way, we've had this conversation before on Sharpen. Sometimes the things that are hard to do are not a signal to leave your role. It's that you're in an uncomfortable space, you're developing a new skill, and that is awesome. So stay there. It's like sit, stay and learn. But other times it can be something that is a red flag. But I love that you share a message of doing the day-to-day and finding meaning and purpose coming alive, even being reflective of that on a regular basis. And then you mentioned, though, you said like all of this is pointing to this direction of legacy. Because as you shared Mary's story, she has a life of legacy. There could be someone else at the university that had a title that sounded really, really, really fancy. However, there might not be, if you don't have that why and that purpose, there's a struggle with knowing and feeling that legacy. So talk about that a little more, because I think that that's something as, yes, we're in the first 10 years of our career, but that needs to be on our radar as well, as what we're doing to cultivate legacy.
Oh, such a big question.
I know. We're ready for it.
And my perspective is that everybody is already leaving a legacy. Some people choose to see it and focus on it and think about it.
That's good.
And take responsibility for the way people experience us and the contribution we leave. And what I mean by that is legacy. You don't leave, you can't really leave a legacy by acquiring and achieving things for yourself. And so oftentimes, and it's easy. Like I do it all the time. Like you're like this purposeful guy on the podcast. Yeah. Like I get up and I look at my phone like everybody else and I say, oh gosh, what do I have to do today? And I catch myself, because a purposeful person will look at their phone and say, how is what I'm going to do today going to impact other people? And it's just those shifts, right? I mean, that's what you start building legacy by taking responsibility for the legacy and contribution you're already leaving, and knowing what that is and holding yourself accountable for what that contribution is wherever you are. And so when you think about legacy, I also do advocate the fact that you can state this, sometimes stating purpose is uncomfortable. It may feel like cheesy to people at times, but usually the cheesier something is probably the more accurate it is about your actual impact. So like really thinking about your strengths, the things that you love to do, the things that you're good at, where those overlap, and then thinking about how those things impact another human being. My grandfather just sent me a card. He's been sending me a birthday card since I was 6 years old in the mail. And it has
awesome.
He's 96 and it has a $1 bill wrapped in tissue paper. I just got $1 last year. And in the last card, he just wrote, Zach, how do you improve the moment? And I'm like, Grandpa, you should do a TED Talk. That's amazing. But I don't think legacy has to be this big thing. That's legacy. Someone interacts with you in your job right now, and they leave that interaction with you. How do you use your strengths to make that person's life better. That's your purpose. That's purpose. And if you reflect on that and you state that over time, no matter where you are, you'll see that every opportunity is an opportunity to build your legacy. And the contribution and the wake you leave behind you throughout any job is your legacy. And you'll probably advance faster in your career. You'll probably be more successful from the traditional metrics standpoint of success than people who don't think about legacy and they just think about acquiring the thing for themselves.
That's so good. One of the questions that I ask myself, that our mentorship group asks ourselves is, and it's more of a when I'm 80 ... And so it's a really great way to, in the moment of, because what it does is it points to the long-term game, a long-term relationships, long-term health, long-term career sustainability and success and those things. And I love that, because even I'll be super frustrated, right? Like, oh, that email, oh, I can hear the tone or whatever. And I'm like,
you get angry
oh,
and you feel it.
and you start vigorously typing like a draft that you're going to
Uh-huh.
send, and you don't send it, hopefully. And I'll be like, when I'm 80, well, I'll be really like, oh yeah, you stuck it to the email world, right? Or when I'm 80, what I want to have practiced, graciousness and humility and whatever those values are. What are some questions, or that's been a helpful framework for me to think about legacy kind of in the moment? Are there other mantras or questions that you have worked through with individuals, organizations to do that kind of in that moment?
Yeah. One of the most convicting is from the New York Times columnist David Brooks. And he wrote a piece a number of years ago. And he just asked the question, are you living by resume virtues or eulogy virtues? And resume virtues are the things that help you create the self-image, help you create your life, get the house with the front porch and sipping tea and all of that. Eulogy virtues are the things you want people to say about you at your funeral. And it's a convicting question. Am I living by resume virtues or am I living by eulogy virtues? The other question that I just heard was by Robert McFarland. He just wrote this book called Underland about the world's under, deep places like caves and things. And then he made an analogy for us about how digging deep is important. But he asked this question are you being a good ancestor?
Wow.
Are we being good ancestors for people that come after us that will never meet us? So beyond 80, beyond when we're gone, what are we leaving behind? And I would venture to say Mary, that janitor, is being a good ancestor because she's leaving a model of working for people to come after her in that position that see themselves as important and significant in a job where many people don't see them as significant. And one of the things that she said when she was leaving at her retirement, she defined the word custodian for all the people there. And custodian is taking custody of a space.
Wow.
And to give people that pride, that's being a good ancestor. And you could think about that in the terms of the world, the planet, your life, what you're doing. It's a very convicting question and revealing. And difficult. Did I wake up and have my coffee and I'm like, am I being a good ancestor today? But I do now think about how is what I'm going to do going to impact someone else? If I send that email, am I regenerating their energy or am I extracting from it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good, right? Do we have a visual of a tombstone that we start putting on our desk? Somebody
I
maybe
know,
like,
yeah.
No. I love, one just call out to me is that love the way Mary defined custodian, because if that's taking custody of a space, if that's the case, in some way, as young professionals, that's somewhat what we're all called to do, is take custody of your space, your cubicle, your digital world or whatever. And more people did that and thought and acted like Mary, man, the world would be a significantly better and more joyful and purposeful
And that
place.
cab driver, right? That was another.
Yeah,
I always find them the most extraordinary people do ordinary things with an extraordinary perspective.
Yeah, that's so good.
And that perspective has shaped those little moments have shaped everything, for me. But they may not be like a VP of finance somewhere.
Right. That, I'll tell you, that's one of the reasons I love having grown up in rural America and then lived in a larger city and moved back to rural America is that I get to see that on display so often in so many small towns and places that people have never heard of and will go to. Just such pride and purpose and work and loving your community, and that's a reflection of that. And it's a beautiful thing. I mean, it's so neat to get to observe it. So.
Yeah.
Zach, tell us about, you've mentioned a ton of work and conversations you've been a part of. Where can we learn more or read more or listen more about some of the work that you're doing? We'll include these in show notes as well, but could you highlight a couple examples? Because I think these are the things that our audience loves to dig into a little bit more.
Yeah, well, and so since it's like the 20s again, I've been thinking about the 20s. So Mary Parker Follett was a social activist and management consultant in the 20s. In 1928, she sort of pioneered this thinking on purpose. And she said that both leaders and followers are following the invisible leader, the common purpose. And that has really spurred me on to write my first book, which was called The Invisible Leader, Transform Your Life, Work, and Organization with the Power of Authentic Purpose. And in that, there's a lot of tools to be able to start developing this purposeful perspective. Whether you're a leader, or however you define that, I define a leader as anybody who influences anybody, or someone who's working. How do you do that? How do you start cultivating that mindset? And then I also have a blog that I write regularly for at zachmercurio.com. And I'm really down with LinkedIn right now. I love LinkedIn. It's my social media platform of choice. So I'm pretty active on there. So you can follow me there at Zach Mercurio.
When you said I'm down with LinkedIn, I was like, oh, okay, so what way? You're like, I'm really down on it. It's got me disappointed.
I'm down with it.
I'm down with it.
Yeah,
I love it.
I love it. I love it. It's used authentically.
Yeah.
It's an amazing platform, especially in the professional world. Like really, that's a great place to contribute.
Absolutely. Well, and a great place to connect others.
Yeah.
As you said, when used authentically. We'll include those links today in show notes so folks can learn more about you and follow along with your work. And your work itself on purpose is super purposeful. So we thank you for the good work you're doing.
Thanks.
We asked 2 questions of guests that come on the Sharpen podcast. One is a favor. We think it's really important to give shout outs and public appreciation because there's so many darn people that I might interview one person, but as you know, there are hundreds of people behind that one person kind of being the guest on that topic. So we'd love for you to make a shout out to one person or a group of people here today.
Yeah, I'm going to do 2. I mean, I finished my PhD in May, and there was
congratulations.
Thank you. And I followed a group of janitors for a couple of years on how they experience meaningfulness in their work. And I can't say their names because of the research protocols, but I want to thank that group of workers for letting me into their everyday work lives and showing me that there is so much pride and purpose in the work that most of us have the luxury of forgetting about on the front lines. And so they're very inspiring to me. And then I want to do a shout out to Brian Dick. He's a psychologist in the Center for Meaning and Purpose here. He wrote this great book called Make Your Job a Calling. And he studied the psychology of this broader calling in life and in work. And his book, Make Your Job a Calling, and his work has been really foundational for me, and he's a big mentor in my life.
Well, I love it. I love it that you spotlighted those folks. And I'm curious, was the group of janitors primarily in Colorado, or were they spread out?
It was at Colorado State, for that research project. And we're going to be expanding some of that research method to other frontline positions to really uncover how people experience purpose in those positions.
That's phenomenal. Awesome. Well, we would also love to hear from you a game changer. It could be a book you've read, an article, we joked earlier, a food item, anything that was a big game changer moment for you.
I did not think of a food item, although I love the candies Atomic Fireballs. They're just like amazing. Have you ever had them?
I don't think so.
Penny candy. Have you ever been to a penny candy store?
Absolutely.
Man, I think I'm like,
Atomic
Atomic Fireballs.
I've been writing down book names.
Amazing. And it's like my childhood in a wrapper. So it reminds me of camping with my family, and there's a little general store, and we got them there. So that's a game changer. But the real game changer, I guess, is I tried to think of a food. I told you the real game changer is the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl was a concentration camp prisoner who also was a psychiatrist. And one of the things in his book he says is that everything can be taken from a person but one thing, the ultimate freedom, and that's the freedom to choose our response to any given set of circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And I often I tell people all the time, don't let a workplace take that freedom away. Don't let external things take that freedom away. Build the mental approach to be able to take captive your experience. So that book just has changed everything.
I've got a list of notes here from today, chock full of good information. So, as well as a note with stars to go get some atomic fireballs.
Oh
So,
man, so good.
yeah. Thank you, Zach. We're better for today's discussion. I know that our audience is going to love everything that you had to share. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.